All
Yeah.
right, everybody. This is Beth Ponder with Train PD, and welcome to Planning a Flipped Approach to Online Learning with Duran Thompson. And I'll give Duran a little more introduction here in a few minutes. I want to thank the other members of the TCAL team that are helping support this webinar today. Anne Marie Molinari Sanders and Katie Snow are helping in the background support and working with any technical issues that you might have. Duran Thompson is our presenter today. She's coming to us from Knoxville, Tennessee, the University of Tennessee. Duran and I are old adult ed colleagues and have worked together for over 19 years. And Duran has worked as an adult education instructor, a professional developer, instructional designer, and all things technology. And so, Duran, I will pass it to you.
All right. Just to write quick, if you're on a laptop, you probably see a longer, skinnier screen. And this is what it looks like when the chat pod and participant pod are open. If you're on a phone, things are more condensed and they're going to look like this down here. Just so you know, one of the things I did to prepare for this webinar was I went into the accessibility settings on my Windows machine. They have the same settings on a Mac. And I made my cursor not only much bigger, but orange, so it would stand out more. So that is something that you can do when you're working in these tools to help point things out to students. And in honor of today's holiday, there are no April Fool's jokes, but a friend of mine posted this on Facebook, so I thought I would share it as sort of an initial funny. He says, "Here, have an orange with googly eyes instead of a prank." As Beth said, I've got a wide range of experience in professional development and in education. I've been working in adult education for the past 20 years and in and out of K through 12 education as well over that time. I'm particularly interested in online and blended learning, adults with learning disabilities, and some issues with special ed in K-12. I'm particularly currently focused on assisting people with technology and approaches to flip learning and getting into the idea of how can we help motivate learners by using gamification in our AE. Gamification is a whole other topic, not talking about that today. Recent presentations I have done, I listed a few here. I presented the ESL at COABE last year, using Blogs for Rigor at the Technology Conference for Texas last year, social media at COABE the year before. Just right quick, an agenda. We're hoping to get through these kind of topics. What is flipped learning? Transitioning from face-to-face online, starting points for flipping online learning, and then we'll start here with just some introductions and an overview. A key element that I want to kind of keep in mind for you folks is that a lot of what we're talking about today is how to think about or how to approach online learning, but this approach also applies to the face-to-face classroom. So this is something that you should be able to apply in either venue once we get back to quote unquote normal. But I'm asking that you kind of think of yourself as an online learner today, as a participant. You certainly will have questions as a teacher. What does it look like from the teacher side? How do you do that? But I'm going to mostly refer you to a document of resources for you to look that part up later. What I want you to think about is you're an online learner today. You're in a direct instruction meeting. What kinds of things am I doing with you as learners that you think are interesting and that you might like to try that with your learners? How many of you work with low literacy or preparing for diploma equivalency exams? Instructors. So yes, I work with these learners. In the participant window, there's a yes and a no button. If you would find those yes and no buttons, and if you work with ABE HSC learners, type yes. If you do not, you can say nothing or click no. And this would be in the bottom of the participant window. So we've got about 65 people here today, and so far about 40 of you have responded in the participant window. 24 of you have said yes, 18 of you have said no. For an instructor, that little piece of the participant window has the information about who has voted each way. And copy and paste. So one very simple way in which you can make things a little bit more interactive with your students is to ask them to log a yes, no. This is also great if you're trying to set another meeting time, ask if somebody's completed an assignment, ask if something was clear. Rather than having everybody take over their microphones or type in the chat, you can just get them to give you a quick yes, no over on the right. Now, we're talking about Zoom at the moment, but almost every synchronous meeting tool, WebEx, GoToMeeting, all of those things that are online, all have a yes, no feature and a participant list. So this is something that you should be able to do in pretty much any tool that you're meeting online with your students. Okay, I have the ability to kind of clear all those responses. And so now I'll ask that again. Yes or no, are you an ESL instructor? Do you work with ESL learners? All right, so we only got nope, we're back up to about 45 responses now, and 29 of you have said yes, and 15 of you have said no. Based on how many people are in here, some of you are, in fact, working with both. All right, so next question, clear? How many of you are new to online learning? This whole foray, due to the current situation, has made you be very new to the online approach. So far, that's most of you, although not everybody's answered in the participant window. All right, last question for this slide. How many of you are new to the flipped approach? How many of you don't really know much about it, haven't really dealt with it? For how many of you is this a new idea? And yes, we're going to talk about what a definition of a flipped approach is. But if the phrasing flipped approach is new to you, then go ahead and say, yes, you're new. Oh, 32. So, all right. So that's great. If you're not new to it, I ask you to be patient while we go over some basic terminology and some concepts so that we can kind of bring everybody up to speed. Okie dokie. So last but not least, I want to do an emotional check-in with my learners. So I would like you to do two things here. One, how many of you are feeling skeptical, anxious, overwhelmed, other feelings? I want you to kind of put those feelings about how you feel as an instructor into the chat. Not at length, make it short. All right, we have excited and I like it. It's all new opportunities. That's great. Overwhelmed, stressed, excited. Oh, I I love the balance between in the group. Nerve-sighted. So again, this is something that you can do with your learners. I always am a proponent of being transparent with your learners and showing that you're a lifelong learner as well. And so sharing with them that this is a little unsettling for you as well, but you're excited, nerve-sighted, and that you're going to be online learning with them at the same time. And it essentially allows you to model being that kind of lifelong learner willing to take educational risks. Oh, somebody says it's becoming fun. Yay! All right, I'm going to turn the chat off. I'm actually, our lovely TCall folks are watching the chat for me to gather questions. What I've learned is that I will, in fact, pay way too much attention to the chat and get off topic. So I'm trying to keep it turned off, except for specific places. So language. Let's take a minute to think about what we think of as our learning spaces vocabulary. As traditional, I mean, as most recently as January, as adult educators, we thought of the learning spaces as being face-to-face or online. And the face-to-face learning space was our classroom, and online was direct instruction. In the online learning business, we tend to call online instruction that is everyone here at the same time, like this meeting, synchronous. But we divide it in half and call that online learning that happens independently, where learners are getting credit or hours. We tend to call that asynchronous learning. Beth's indicated that Texas tends to call that distance learning, and it falls under the distance learning guidelines. You'll have homework outside of work or outside work, and we would call that self-directed learning over in the online sphere. Flipped learning says, let's think about our learning spaces differently. Key element to flipped learning is not whether or not you use video, whether or not you use a particular tool. It's a pedagogical approach. It's the way of thinking about teaching, where you say the direct instruction, where the teacher and the peers are available. That direct instruction moves from the group learning space, where the teacher and the peers are available, into the individual learning space. So students do the passive listening before they come to class, or the reading, or an activity that activates current knowledge before they come to class. And then when they come to a meeting like this that is synchronous, the instructor works very hard to engage them in interacting with what they've learned outside of the shared space. And so I already jumped into it. So flipped view of learning spaces is the shared learning space, what we'd think of as a classroom or synchronous, and the individual learning space, which is where homework would come in. Now, homework as a phrase, I know is loaded for Texas Adult Ed. So we'll make a difference between asynchronous work, which is typically what we would think of as distance learning, and self-directed learning, which is where our learners are gaining those really important lifelong learning skills and becoming independent learners. So one of the strengths of a flipped approach is that it actively supports your adult education students to gradually become more and more independent learners. Now, you may be very lucky. I know a lot of our ESL learners who have a higher education in their own language are already very independent learners. But for a lot of our native English speakers, part of the reason that they're in our classes is that they're not very good at learning on their own, or that school wasn't something that worked for them. So a flipped approach essentially tries to encourage them to become more independent learners. Just because you're online doesn't mean that you have to be more formal or less transparent than you are in a typical classroom. Speaking of being independent online learners, when you registered for this session, there was the option to do some pre-work, some professional development flip, and to watch some videos and maybe post your thoughts on those videos before you came to this session. I don't believe I have anyone in this session who sent me a note or posted anything about the online learning here. I'm going to clear all and ask you to say yes if you looked at either of these videos before coming into this session. Oh, that's a lot of no's. Oh, yay, we have a yes. Thank you very much, Kay. I give this pre-work, 1, to demonstrate how flipped learning might work, 2, so that you would have an opportunity to think about this information before you come to this session, and 3, to talk about the idea that, yeah, your learners might not do the pre-work. What are you going to do? So here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you to watch this video in class. I'm going to share a chunk of it via this tool, and we'll talk about how I did that afterwards. But then we're going to talk about whether or not you feel like that was the best use of our shared meeting time and what might be a better way to share that video in a flipped approach.
Every day, 7.2 million students walk into classrooms throughout the United States. These classrooms generally look the same. 30 students sit in rows of desks taking notes in their notebooks while the teacher stands at a whiteboard teaching a lesson. Regardless of ability level, each student receives the exact same information at the exact same pace. As Ms. Jackson presents this same material, the students respond differently. Tommy gets it, while Allison is bored, and Maria is lost. At the end of the day, these same students head home. While at home, they sit at the kitchen table doing their homework and trying to remember what Ms. Jackson said. Students like Tommy make it most of the way through the homework, while others, like Allison, find it easy and fly through it. At the same time, students like Maria get frustrated and need some extra help. Ms. Jackson recognizes that students have different needs and would love to work individually with each student, but this requires time and resources that her school does not have. One solution to this problem is the flipped classroom. Here's what it looks like. While at home, students sit in their rooms watching videos of the lesson that Ms. Jackson assigned. Tommy is still able to work at his normal pace. Allison is no longer bored because now she can use this new technology to fast forward through the easy material. And Maria is no longer frustrated because she can review the material that she didn't understand by pausing and rewinding. When she really gets stuck, she can get help from her classmates. New technology platforms like Moodle and Edmodo make it easy for her to chat online with her classmates. Just as the homework is different, the classroom is different as well. Instead of standing in front of the room speaking, Ms. Jackson walks around the room. She checks in with Tommy as he works collaboratively with some students. She pushes Allison further with some more challenging work. And she helps Maria with the pieces that she still doesn't quite get. In the traditional model, the teacher stands between the students and the knowledge. But with the flipped classroom model, the students have direct access to the knowledge, and the teacher serves as a coach, mentor, and guide, helping the students access this knowledge.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing the video. And notice that I'm sharing this PowerPoint not as a full presentation, but I'm letting you see the behind part. And so I've got slides that are showing up over here. I'll go ahead and close that off. And there's nothing wrong with sharing it that way with your students. The advantage for me is that I get to add things really quickly and flexibly as they come up or you guys ask questions. The disadvantage is, for example, my pointer turns into something else every time I get to where I could type. And there are other things cluttering the screen for students who have some trouble with that. But it's just another option you have when you're sharing your screen in a synchronous tool. Okay, so now I've given everybody a little bit of a definition of what flipped learning is, and I've given you a little bit more, a clear explanation of what it is. And what I'd like to do is say, why are you here? What are your goals? And if you want, you can just write 1, 2, 3. You want to learn about the flipped approach, or you want to learn how to apply it in online settings, or you're really focused more on how to do the tech for flipped and online learning. You have a clue as to what they are or how to go about it, but you're kind of wanting more tips on how to do the technology piece. Or if you have some other reason for being here, that's fine. So in the chat, please type your reason for being here. And if you want to, you can just use 1, 2, 3 as your easy way to type it in the chat.
One thing I've seen a couple of times here is lesson planning, engaging students, better support programs for training.
All right, I'm afraid that how to adapt online learning for incarcerated students is beyond my scope in an hour and a half. But Beth can write that down.
I got it.
Okay, so some people mentioned that they had some concerns that they didn't know the pre-work existed, but that there were challenges in the and I don't want anybody to feel bad for having not done it. And that's why I said I have 3 reasons for including it. If you are able to get to it, then it has hopefully enhanced your learning. But it's partly to say, hey, assigning pre-work has challenges, and you've just wonderfully been part of displaying that. I didn't want anybody to stress over that. Also, this link here, and Beth, if you would put this link in the chat, that's a web page, a blog page I've created for everything for this session. And it has the pre-work on it, and it has a resource handout on it. And let me see if I can pull that up and share it. So you can have all of that stuff after class, so you can access what I gave you as pre-work, including that video, after this session. So you haven't really missed anything or lost out on anything by not doing the pre-work. It's just an example for us today. So this resources document on the 3rd page contains a lot of links to tools that I encourage you to investigate after this session. More reading on the flipped learning and some great sites that will help you out. Research that we used to prove that this was a effective instructional technique for adult education, but it also has some scenarios that we're going to go over here in just a minute. So if those scenarios go by too fast for you to really read them on the slide, don't sweat it. You have access to that on this site.
And I did put the direct link to the PDF in the chat pod.
So this site here down the bottom is where that link is. It's actually right down below here, but those videos are linked here and here. So you have access to them. There is no issue. In addition to the video you just watched was another video that talks about 8 lessons learned from teaching online. And those are opinions from college, university professors, but they've done it a lot, and you can hear their conviction that these are really important things in the video. And so I think it's worth your time to listen through it, even though some of it doesn't exactly apply to adult ed perfectly. The big focus of those 8 lessons is the idea of being learner-centered. So the question of lesson planning, I would tell you that lesson planning, the basics of it, establishing goals, and then creating activities that meet those goals, is actually pretty much the same. What's different is which activities you plug in to help people understand the concept, or to practice it for fluency, or to be more critical thinkers about a concept. Hopefully, that's something that you'll see by the time we are done here. But these 8 lessons learned all really have to do with think about things as a student. It's part of why I asked you to think of yourselves as online learners today, and what would work well for you. Yesterday was a great recommendation. The instructor said that she always planned in a small break or a physical activity for everybody to stand up and do as part of what they did online to help include some of the just physical moving around that happens in an adult ed classroom. And what a great way to re-energize. She also puts in songs, is an ESL instructor, but recognize that just because you're in front of a computer doesn't mean you can't ask students to move around a little or to do something that we don't necessarily think of when we think webinar or online learning. Okay, so we talked about this flipped view of learning spaces and got a feel for flipped learning as a concept. Given that, how many of you think that you're already using a flipped approach when you were in your typical classroom, or have already started using it while you're moving to online? So that's a yes, no in the participant panel. So I mean, if you think about it, if you're asking students to do something outside the classroom and be prepared to discuss it when they come into the classroom, that's a flipped approach. If you're trying to maximize the critical thinking concepts you're doing in your classroom, that's part of a flipped approach. All right, not a whole lot of confidence as to whether yes, no's. We have 12 firm no's and 17 firm yeses, and a lot of people who are like, I'm not sure. That's okay. Later in this presentation, I'll ask you again after we've looked at flipped learning a little bit more in depth. Okay, so let's take a look at your classroom so that we can look at this more in depth. Now I'm going to ask you to do a low-tech task. I'm somebody who likes to use technology when it's most useful and how it's most useful. So I'm going to start asking you to do a paper pencil task here in this distance learning. What I'd like you to do is take out a piece of paper or a sticky note or anything that you can write on and draw yourself a circle. What I'm going to ask you to do is think about what your typical face-to-face class looked like to an outside observer on any given day. And you're going to divide this circle like a pie graph into 3 parts. And you're going to talk about how much of the time would be spent in lecture where to a large extent it's them listening to you or watching a video or reading a passage independently, where essentially they're just getting information. How much of your time is spent with students actively trying to apply learning that you've talked to them about or they've learned through a book or a workbook? And how much of the time in your face-to-face classes is spent on more complex cognitive tasks like problem-based learning or group activities, group discussions, applying these at a higher level. If you're familiar with Bloom's taxonomy, when we talk about complex cognitive tasks, we're talking about creating, evaluating, analyzing, and applying. If what they're doing is remembering what they've read or remembering what you've said, or they are just proving that they can do it once, or that they can do the basics, that's really the lower level, the practice lecture. One of the things flipped learning is trying to do is hopefully increase the amount of time you might have in class for complex tasks. So if you haven't finished your graph, go ahead and finish it now and kind of decide what rough percentage of your time in a typical classroom is spent in lecture, what rough percentage is spent in practice and understanding tasks, and what rough percentage is done in complex cognitive tasks. Okay, so hopefully everybody's done drawing their graph. I'm going to ask you to put percentages in the chat here in just a second, but here's what quote unquote my part chart looks like. This is what K through 12 in 2014 said is what their classrooms looked like. 58% of the time was being spent in lecture, and 36% of the time was being spent in practice and understanding tasks, which is great because you're in the classroom and you have the support of your peers and your teachers. But it meant that there was very little time left for complex cognitive tasks. And what flipped learning is trying to do is help you identify those lecture new content type tasks and move them outside the class so that students will come in knowing or hopefully having that information already and work on applying it once they've practiced it. All right, so now if you would, yep, Austin's led the curve. He's put his in. So 60% for him lecture, 30% for him practice, and 10% in complex tasks. Thank you, Austin, for being brave. If everybody else would kind of toss their percentages in the chat and share. If we were doing this face-to-face, I'd have everybody hold up their sticky note or turn to some peers and show off their sticky notes and discuss them. But there's A, an awful lot of you, and B, it's a little hard for you all to show video because it eats up our bandwidth. If you were in a smaller class setting online, so you only had 10 students, I would totally have them hold all of their sticky notes up to the video camera so everybody could see their percentages at the same time. That's another way in which you can integrate a very simple low-tech task into a high-tech online class. 40, 30, 30. Good. I find when I talk to people about this that often ESL instructors, because folks are having to discuss and work with the language out loud in pairs or in groups, they often feel like they have a much higher complex cognitive task ratio than our HSE or even ABE students. So, you know, just feel good, A, that it's just so widely varying, different teachers are different, but also that we, in a lot of cases, are better off than what was being done in K-12. I will also say that this same kind of graph applies to post-secondary school, and they're also using flipped learning to try to make what happens in the face-to-face or synchronous time, if they're online, be more interactive, engaging, and discussion-based. So if you shift this way, you are in fact preparing them for the modern educational system. So here we go. The other thing about this sort of direct instruction and homework concept in a traditional classroom is that when you look at it, these things are your passive low-risk tasks. Out of class, however, we're asking them to do all of the hard work. And I, as an instructor, I can't tell you how unhappy I was when I discovered that a student had spent an entire worksheet doing something wrong and then had practiced that wrong skill, and now I have to take the time to unlearn the wrong and have them practice the right. It's also where they may not have any support or be able to ask questions, and especially now that they're learning online, you may not feel as accessible to them, although hopefully if you've got some tool for them to communicate with you, whether it's an email address or a discussion tool, maybe you are more accessible. So flipped learning, with this idea of the shared space and the individual learning space, says let's swap the emphasis. So passive low-risk tasks are now out of class, and what's in class is the higher level cognitive tasks. Assessment may have to happen outside of learning time. I know that we were talking a little bit yesterday about assessment and how assessment is being dealt with under this new regime. So I'm going to stay away from assessment today. That's still being sorted out. But I'm talking about here formative assessment, where you're just trying to get a grip on how well students understand something. That can be done while you're quote unquote in class, or it can be done after class. Somebody in the last session asked me, so wait a minute, how is flipped learning different than blended learning? And blended learning essentially looks at the two of these things together. It says that what we used to think of as the classroom space is now this live synchronous space, and the individual learning space is the stuff that's outside the classroom. So really, blended learning is not entirely different than flipped. The key element, however, is this passive and active, and having students do something before class and maybe after class. So in a flipped environment, you would ask a student to watch maybe a 2 or 3 minute video. I noticed somebody in the chat said, I tried it and they didn't watch the video. There are a number of issues that can be involved in that, but the most common one is the video is too long. Rita, you probably need to go ahead and say that privately to the TCAL folks, and they will help you with your name. So you would assign a reading or a very short video, and you want to keep it simple. One of the big key elements to the flipped approach is that you stop trying to cover everything and you really focus in on the key concepts when you're assigning work outside of class. If they came to class and they just knew these 3 things, it would be so much easier to teach this topic. That's what you put outside of class. You can then expand on it in what you say in class. It doesn't mean you never lecture in a face-to-face setting. It just means that you expand on what they already should know, and you have them apply it and talk about it and practice it, and you're more in your shared space. And then the active, that's where the active high risk comes. You can also suggest that they do some fluency activities once they're comfortable with something outside of class. And again, I would keep them short and I would keep them simple because our learners aren't independent yet, or not all of them are good independent learners yet. So the most common mistake people make when they flip is they put a lot of learning before class or a lot of learning outside of class. And for us in adult ed, we need to scaffold this. We need to give them just a little bit, make it really easy for them to do. And in a distance environment, you can do silly things like say, you get a sticker for having done it ahead of time. Or you can, we'll talk about breakout sessions later. You can put the people who haven't watched the video in a breakout session with the assignment to watch the video while you work with the rest of the class on something else. So we'll talk about breakouts in a minute. All right, so now that we've talked about the flip a little more and talked about this idea of passive, high risk, and ideas, how many of you feel like you might already be using some of this flipped approach now? So I said I would ask that question again.
Darren, we have a question from Carol. What is your definition of a short video? Mine was 10 minutes.
The current research on educational video is there is a sharp decline on people who stop watching after 6 minutes. The actual recommendation is the closer you can get to 2, the better. If you think about us as adults, I find longer videos with no break to be dull. And as a teacher making a video, I often will say, gosh, I don't want to have to try to make this 10 minutes long. So we're looking at really short, and that's part of why we're talking about making it really focused. I just want them to have these 3 concepts before they come into class. And it doesn't have to be a video. It can be a short reading. It can be a short task. And I'll show you here in just a moment when we get to some examples, what we're talking about that. So for those of you who don't feel like you do any kind of flipped learning at the moment, how many of you think that, and having heard all of this, you might be wanting to try it and you might be wanting to apply this approach in an online context? Actually, that's a really good point. Kay mentioned that the shorter video, the cool thing about video is that they can play it again and again. And they can repeat it and they can go back and they can listen to it and try to catch it. One of the things you can do is not only assign the video, but give them a notes sheet, and they're supposed to pull the following concepts or vocabulary or ideas out of the notes. You can also use any kind of online survey tool. One of my favorites is Google Forms, and we'll look at that again here in a minute. But anything you use for online surveys, you can assign that as a task after they watch the video. You can just ask them to email you. What are the 3 main concepts in whatever it is you had them read or watch? The idea here is to build that independent learning and to have them come to class with basic vocabulary, basic knowledge, the key issue that you want them to know before they come to class. Great, a vocabulary list. But I would say not only the vocabulary list, I would say a link to where they can find the definitions online, or a video that talks about or demonstrates that vocabulary. You're really wanting what you ask them to do as pre-work to be entertaining and interesting and low risk. I can't get it wrong. How can I watch a video? And you need to say that. It's 2 minutes of your time, anytime. Just click this link, watch this video, that's, and then shoot me an email with a key concept. That's what we're looking for. All right, so that sounds like a big chunk of the group. Only 13 of you think you want to try flipped learning, and very few of you said you already do it. Does that mean that the rest of you are not interested in trying to flip learning in an online venue? And one of the sort of, it's a really subtle difference, but rather than teach the information as new and then have them watch a video to expand on it, you would want them to watch a video beforehand and then expand on that knowledge in class. If you wanted to have them expand on it further out of class, that's fine. But you're trying to get them to activate knowledge or have had that first pass on their own, so that you kind of skip the, wait, I didn't get that, can you go over it again? That happens when you do a lecture. In theory, they already did that by watching the video as many times as they needed before they came to class.
Durin, we have a couple of comments that kind of go to your question. So one's from Bethany, and she says, would apply in my class, just concerned with variables for underprivileged students. Don't want to widen the gap.
Got it. And this is where I'm going to ask you to talk about what TCOL and TWC are doing to help get tech to your learners.
So Bethany, this is Beth Ponder. One of the things that TWC has been working with Deborah Hargrove in our office and our webmaster Jorge to put together a web page, kind of COVID-19 response page, where they're putting messages from TWC as well as resources. So there's distance learning resources, there's information about different online learning platforms, and then there's also an area about technology and how you can access inexpensive internet and equipment. And so what I'll do when I'm done talking is I will grab that and put it in the chat so everybody's got it to see if that might be at least a place to start. And then we have a comment from Carol. I'm having trouble with adult students working longer hours and not wanting to do anything extra. They have a hard time coming to class.
Flipped learning is not going to change that. However, if the online class is engaging, there's a higher likelihood that they'll be more motivated to come. And that's actually one of the things that I'm hearing from all different educational venues, K-12, post-secondary, and adult ed, is that if our learners are too worried about those basic concepts of shelter, food, safety to actually spend time professionally, essentially professionally develop themselves learning, we may have to cut them some slack. To a large extent, what I'm talking about here is how to improve the experience for those who feel that they can show up and that they can devote at least a minimum amount of time to learning. Really dealing with number that the current situation is doing on some of our learners who are already lacking in support to begin with is beyond the scope of this particular session, and I can't use flipped learning to fix that. Sorry. Let's take a moment to say, if your name is not clear in the list, man, it looks like you've got almost everybody, maybe Leon could put his last name in, everybody on the list all up to date. There is a way that you can change your name in the participant list by hovering over and clicking rename and typing in your full name. If anybody else is with you, you want to make sure that that person is typed into the chat or that your name actually says Andrea and Betty.
I did put it in the chat, but that's a good reminder. In this day and age, there's probably not a whole bunch of us that are sitting together to watch this webinar, but if you do have somebody that's with you, please make sure you put their name in the chat so we can give them proper credit.
All right, so some quick examples of what this might look like in adult ed. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about the example and then say, how would you, these were written for the face-to-face setting, how would we translate this, or how much would this have to be changed to become an effective online activity? So here, Ruth reteaches a high school equivalency class, and she asks them to complete a sheet with definitions of the 5 most common 3D geometric shapes. She gives them the definitions, so they don't have to go find them and possibly get them wrong. And what she's asking them to do is, next to each definition, write down something in your home or community that you think has this shape and bring it back to class with you. It shouldn't take you 15 minutes. Okay, and then in class, she groups her students together and has them compare the items they found for each shape, working together to address any they don't think meet the definitions and why. Students who did not complete the assignment are put together to complete the sheet using items found around the class. So if I was thinking about putting this into an online learning scenario, I would say, before tomorrow's class, please read the definitions of these 5 most common shapes and bring something to class that you could show on camera that you think fits each of these shapes. And then as a group, I would have everybody hold up the thing they think is a pentagon, and we could discuss as a group which ones do and do not fit, which would be teaching by examples and non-examples. And for students who didn't do the work, we could literally, because we're all there live and they're at home, we could say, all right, can you think of anything in your home, or is there anything in the room that you're in that is that shape and ask them to sort of do it on the spot after they've seen everybody else's shape and are now have a whole lot more support in answering the question. That's one way to do a flip. Here's one with a high-level ESL learners. In a classroom setting, she found recordings in English on YouTube for Martin Luther King and the Civil War and racism, because she was doing this in January. And she asked them to watch videos at home before coming to class. Now, these are a little longer, partly because these are high-level learners, but one is a miniature bio of Martin Luther King, and the other one was the I Have a Dream speech. Now, she could also have students watch just a piece of this speech. You don't have to watch the whole thing. I want you to watch the first 2 minutes of this and not the rest. So that's another way to get your videos to be shorter, is to tell them a piece of a video that you'd like them to watch. Watch it from minute 2 to minute 3. And then she, of course, when they come back to class, she designs discussion and independent learning activities based around these. One of which is demonstrated down here at the bottom, where an instructor had her ESL students complete a video of their own that says, I have a dream, and then they fill it in. And she asked them to dream big. How could they change the world? Not just, I'd like a new car, or I'd like enough money to feed my kids, but how could we really solve big problems? What is your dream for the world? And so if you want, this is a great video down here. And again, you'll have all of these resources when I'm done teaching today. I'll clean up my PowerPoint and put it up on that pre-work site, so you can download this and have all of these links. But that's an example of something that somebody could do as flipped learning. Another one, here's career path math, and what they're trying to do is fractional parts of hours, minutes, and seconds. And there's a slideshow the teacher has created, and they're supposed to review that slideshow out of class and mail her any questions or concerns they have about what they've watched. Here it says take a 3-question short quiz on the material. That's another option for knowing that they looked at the slideshow. And you can't get it wrong. You look at the slideshow to complete the quiz. He's not worried about them remembering it at this point. He just wants to know that they've gotten the key concepts out of the slideshow. In class, he shows the Google survey results graphs. So what I'd like to do at the moment here is give you an idea of what that would look like. I'm going to get you the link for this. So using Google Forms, I created an exit ticket. And what I'd like everybody to do is click on this link and fill out the exit ticket. Okay, let me share. I'm going to swap over to the survey so you can see what I might be able to show in class, which is the results. Sharing, sharing, sharing. So here's the form that you guys are filling out. What are the 3 main points that you took away from today's lesson on flipped learning? You can just type 1. You don't have to fill it out in depth. But this is just for example. I could ask them to fill this out after they watch the slideshow before they come to class. I could ask them to fill it out after, or I could make this a question that's literally a different way of doing polling in class, and then I can show the responses here. And I, of course, included names so I would know who completed this activity, but I don't know who said what, or at least I'm not showing who said what. A bunch of these responses are from the previous group. Okay, and this is great because what this is giving me is feedback about what kind of key ideas you're taking away from this session so far, and we're only maybe halfway through. So this is essentially what Bob was doing, was essentially having them watch a slideshow and fill out a form. This last example, Miguel is going to start flipped learning, but he's more interested in creating videos that are very specifically what his learners asked for. In this example, he creates a video about voting. He actually goes to the place that you can fill out the forms for voting and turns it in and shows how not scary it is, and then brings it back to class and asks his higher level ESL students to give him feedback. And they do. He adjusts his video, adds some accountability and some vocabulary sheets, and then puts it online and shows it to all his students. Now, this, with our current situation, this is probably not as doable, but some interesting stuff that's come up from the K-12 world is that they're using this as an opportunity to do virtual tours. They're either finding virtual tours online, or they're asking people they know who are out of work and sitting at home to either join their class live or to record an interview if they're not comfortable with live about their job or about their task. I have actually asked one of my colleagues' wife, who works in an emergency room, if she would record a video for Tennessee Career and Technical Education about how emergency room procedures have changed for orderlies from before the virus and now that they're having to do the virus. Now here in Knoxville, we're not in the panic that New York is, so I wouldn't ask a health services person this in a very tight environment, but if you think about it, there are a lot of folks who now have less to do than they normally do, and so you have an golden opportunity to perhaps bring in guests or again create little video tours that they could watch before class and then talk about that job or that tour in class. I will include a link to this exit ticket just so you guys can see it in the resources that I put online. I will also say that creating things in Google Forms is fairly simple, and there is a link to Google Drive and how to do forms in Google Drive in our resources. Okay, and it may be giving you trouble if you're working on a phone or a tablet. It may be something that's better on a desktop machine. Okay, so one of the things that we do want to come back to, hang on, share, is that flipped learning is not a new thing. Technically, it's been around since the late 1800s when lawyers first started sending home cases and asking students to discuss those cases in class. It does have a lot of research behind it, particularly in differentiated and individualized instruction, project-based learning, and active learning. And there's a body of knowledge being built, particularly in K-12 and post-secondary, on how effective it is. I will tell you that in general, people are saying that flipped learning is almost never less successful than traditional learning. And depending on how well the teacher has implemented it, is often much more successful than traditional, and I do mean very traditional, stand at the front of the room and lecture learning. A lot of our research is coming from colleges.
The one question, Duran, there's not anything specific right this moment. I think we were sharing where to find links and folks are sharing some resources. There was a question that came up earlier that I was holding, some questions around Zoom. And okay. I don't know if you are familiar with the free account.
Yes.
Okay, so a couple of questions about that. One was, is the yes and no button available in the free account? And I believe some of our colleagues answered that as affirmative, but you may know. But then there's the question about there's a time limit on the rooms in the free account. That's my understanding there, you can apply to have those lifted.
If you go to zoom.us/education, they say that they are removing the 40-minute time limit on the basic free account for K through 12 schools. You sign in, you need to see if your account has already been enabled, and if your existing account is not enabled that way, you can click the request offer button. Let me see if I can share my screen. Okay, so if you click this request offer button, it says sign up for a free basic account and then fill in the information below. If you already have an account, all you have to do is fill in the information below and say submit. It's taking up to 72 hours for them to remove the limit because they're getting so many requests. And this does not limited to K-12, it's anyone who is an educator, and they will ask you for your school website or your school name, anything to kind of give proof that you work with a school system of some sort. Colleges and community colleges are doing this as well. It doesn't give you a pro account, but it removes that 40-minute limit. Does that help everyone?
Thank you. I think that was the question. Then we had one other question about Zoom that I think is more a technical question that I think we can probably hold and try and respond to offline.
Okay. What I'd like you guys to start thinking about now, and this is going to be your exit ticket for yourselves, is what is going to be your next 1 to 3 steps of the stuff we've already talked about. What would you like to do next? How might you start this process? But I'd like you to have your next steps on a piece of paper that you take away from this session. One option, because I am a National Links trainer, is that you can get on the Links community and join the conversations there on distance learning and on flipped learning, more of its distance. There's a great conversation being had about WhatsApp, and I'll type that tool here. but she's using phones and not this kind of live tool in order to do speaking and listening with her ESL learners. And she's posting on links each time she meets with her class what they did, what she liked, what they changed, and how she's expanding how she's using WhatsApp and different tools in distance learning as she and her class are learning. It's a great read to see how brave she's been and how she's learning new stuff and importing new stuff one step at a time. So one of the recommendations that I would make for you as you're thinking about either flipped learning, online learning, or a blend of both is that you give yourself permission to start simply. Doing very simple things well is probably going to be better and more effective for your students than trying to do a lot of things and you and them both getting overwhelmed at the same time. So the links community, again, these resources are on the resource sheet and it's going to be in the PowerPoint, is a great resource. Beth, if you wanted to speak briefly about the kind of discussion or networking resources that are available in Texas.
Well, just a reminder to everyone that we have a listserv, which is kind of an email discussion list specifically for adult education instructors. We have several lists, but that particular one is a place where we can share resources with instructors. But we also have a community of practice in the PD portal, again, specifically for instructors. And Anne-Marie Molinari Sanders is the host for that and moderator for that community of practice. So again, those are places here within Texas that you can go and we can share how it's going and also share all these resources.
Another resource for you is that homework site. Not just that one page, but if you look across the top, you'll see other pages I've created. There's just a page for links related to flipped learning and what other folks have done in regards to that. There's also, you can see the links and some resources for creating videos are also on that site. So that's one next step you could take is learn more. And if you want to find videos versus creating videos, that's fine. If you want to attend tomorrow's session, that might be your next step. So any of these are great next steps for improving your approach to online learning. So people asked in the last session, what are examples of some things that I could do in the synchronous classroom, or how might I use tools outside of something like Zoom and then inside something like Zoom? So I mentioned WhatsApp. We've already talked about Google Forms. If you're familiar with other Google products, you can share anything you can put online, you can share and show your students. Especially with Google, if your students are all able to interact with Google through their tools, not everybody can, but Google does have phone apps. You could actually have your students work on a joint document or a shared spreadsheet all at the same time and show the results of their shared work by just sharing the document via something like this. So Google Forms, Docs, spreadsheets, all are tools where you can do that. Similarly, there are a list of online gaming type things like Kahoot, quizzes.
Okay, so we have Padlet, Quizlet, Kahoot. We talked about WhatsApp.
The reading resources you talked about.
Yes, ma'am. Okay, Common Lit, ReadWorks, PBS Learning Media, Newseum, Wonderopolis. That is Newseum, and put ED next to Newseum. It's all one word. There you go.
Okay. And what I'll do is I'll go find all the links for these and put them on this slide. But basically, you could ask students to interact in a Kahoot, quizzes, or Quizlet online activity, just like you would in your face-to-face classroom, except that what you're going to display on the screen is what you would normally show on the wall in your class. You could ask students to interact with Padlet, which is kind of like a pin board, and it actually, I've seen teachers use it as an LMS, if that's not a learning management system like Canvas even. But it's a place where you could put a prompt and they can type responses in the comments and they don't have to have an account with Padlet. You can do the same thing with any blog tool. I use WordPress, but blogs are also good. And one of the things you can do is find out what your students mostly have access to or have used in the past. So if you have students who use Instagram a lot, you could have them use Instagram You could have them go and look at an image on Instagram and make their comments there. Common Lit, ReadWorks, PBS Learning Media, Newseum, and Wonderopolis are all good sources for reading assignments or videos that they could watch before they come to class and that you could discuss. There's a ton of resources that our K through 12 school has just put online, and I will put the link to those resources in this as well, because a bunch of them are free and available to the public. Tons of books online, tons of with activities already designed for them. So it's not so much about what can I do with the technology as this technology allows me to share my screen just like I would display stuff on a board in a classroom. This technology allows me to have students work together on a document just like I would in a regular classroom. And so one of the things we're about to demonstrate is this technology can allow me to do breakout groups so that I can ask students to discuss things together in small groups and then come back to the class and we can report out or come to conclusions or share our brainstormings, etc. So when we're thinking about lesson plans for online learning or lesson plans for flipped learning, it's not that it has to be something different or new or fancy. It's just thinking about how what we do is different. It's thinking about them in a different way with this idea of the shared space and the independent space, and how can I maximize the time and interactivity and engagement in that share space and push the slide lectures or the discussions outside so students have the opportunity to view that at their leisure and even repeatedly if they need it.
So Duraid, we're having some great sharing in the chat.
Yay!
Of resources and a discussion about WhatsApp versus Remind. So I just wanted to share that. And then somebody's put something called Seesaw. I'm not familiar with Seesaw, so we might have to go.
Added Remind, and I put Seesaw.
We'll have to go figure that out, what that is.
Okay.
So.
All right. So again, another resource that's available there is Myths About the Flipped Approach. I'm a big go-getter cheerleader for the flipped approach, and there are a lot of things that people worry about and are concerned about. And this article does a good job of sort of catching those all together. Things like it requires video. It does not. I have to do flip my entire class. Nope, you can just flip one little piece of one assignment. There's only one way to do it. Nope, there's a gazillion different approaches. It clearly is not going to reduce the need for a teacher. That's what our students desperately want in this distant venture. Students are going to love it. Nope, you're absolutely right. There are going to be challenges in having them do it outside of class. And so I would literally consider finding or making a 30-second video for them to watch. And, I don't mean shame them, but really, you couldn't find time for a 30-second video? It might be that you ask your students who come in, as they come in, did you watch the video? Take 30 seconds and go do that, because 30 seconds is not that long to wait for a student to come back to class. And then you scaffold that up to longer and longer videos. We're having to teach them to flip their learning and be independent learners. So yeah, some of them aren't going to like it, and they may not do that outside work. And then we already talked briefly about internet access and how Texas is supporting your learners to gain access to materials. Just to note, Links has some information on their digital literacy initiatives page that also talks about helping students find access to the internet and technology, including a lesson plan that you can use with your learners to help them brainstorm how to find technology, although that has some challenges. So I asked you before, what are your next 1 to 3 steps? I'm getting back to that. And so now I would like to ask you if you could please type those in the chat. Once we have got your 1 to 3 next steps, and 1 is fine, make it specific. I won't not just learn more, but I'm going to go read, or I'm going to go watch, or I'm going to talk to so-and-so about. And if you're thinking about doing something with your learners, don't try to say for everybody, with this class, I'm going to try this thing, because that makes it more doable and easier to check off on your to-do list. While you are typing those in the chat, your next 1 to 3 step, that's your exit ticket. I'm going to do a quick run through of Flip Review, and then we're going to do a breakout session demonstration. Ooh, lots of new messages. My chat's not scrolling. No wonder I'm having trouble.
We did have a question from Miriam. Is this good for beginning students?
Well, it goes to what do you ask them to do outside of class? So for pre-literate learners, where language is a barrier, you might simply ask them to find one word that they had trouble with and bring it into class, and that's going to form the basis of your conversation or your instruction. So make the tasks as easy as your early learners need. So again, flip learning, shift passive and direct instruction outside the classroom. Make the outside of class work as non-threatening and as simple as it needs to be to get them started in this process. Focus on practice and application with support inside the classroom. Nobody wants to look at the top of everybody's heads while they do a worksheet in a webinar. So you may find yourself doing a lot more group working through a problem or a worksheet example and asking students to then practice it in maybe a breakout room or outside of class and then come in and discuss their challenges. Learner-centered, you don't have to create video. You can just create slideshows that have all of what they need to learn on the slideshow, and you don't have to have any voice at all. I really recommend that you use the tech that is available to you and don't worry about having to learn a lot of new things. If Zoom is new for you and that's what you're going to learn, keep it to Zoom. Use those Zoom tools for polling and for chatting until you're comfortable with Zoom and your students, and then add another component. You know, that may be just 2 classes, but keep it simple for yourself. And oh my gosh, please, please, please tell people about it. There's so little reporting and research on flipped learning and even online learning for adult education. The more you post online somewhere and share, the happier other teachers will be, and we won't all be recreating the wheel.
And I just want for all of us, before we do the breakout, to thank Duren for joining us this afternoon and sharing all of her knowledge with us as we kind of take on this brand new world. And so we appreciate her taking the time to be with us.
And I'm learning flexibility too. I learned things yesterday that I used today in Zoom, and 2 weeks ago I wasn't doing this webinar, and I had to sort of create it from scratch. So we're all in this boat together, doing things in a quick turnaround. Okay, so the breakout option has 2 options. You can assign students to rooms if you want these students to work together, or in a bigger classroom, if you're not as worried about that, you can just tell it to randomly assign students. So we have 69 people in here right now. I'm going to put you in 10 rooms, and that should hopefully mean that at least one person in every room can get their microphone to work and can talk, but you should be able to unmute yourself in the breakout rooms. Note that you can share screens in the breakout rooms. I want you to take a look at the tools you have available to you, try the chat, etc. There's no task for you while you're in breakout other than explore the breakout room. If a cool conversation happens, that's great. No problem, keep going. I'm going to give you maybe a minute or 2. Okay, probably closer to 4, because what I'm going to do is jump into all the breakout rooms and just check on people and show you how a teacher can visit each breakout room and check on students. So there we are, breakout rooms, 10 rooms. I like seeing the kid. Hi, Bethany. You're going to see a notice that says join breakout room, and you'll click on the join. It'll take a moment, and you should end up in something that looks very similar to this, except that the stuff at the bottom will be different. You'll lose your participant panel and all of that. So here we go, breakout rooms.
Okay, got it. How much time do you think we should put them out on a breakout? I mean, before, I'm afraid of losing my students if I start setting up breakout rooms.
Well, and I think a part of it depends on how big your class is, right?
Oh.
Yes, the one thing is when you are the teacher, if you are using Zoom, when you're the teacher, you'll be the host, and you can go in and check on them.
Okay.
So you will have a list of which rooms, and you can go in every so often and make sure that they're on task, or if they have questions or need assistance. So, and you can go from room to room. So,
but what are the breakup rooms for? Because like Diana said, I'm also afraid to lose them if I do this, like if they are not looking at me, or if I'm not doing anything with them.
Well, one example that Duran used was, for instance, you gave them a short video and they didn't watch it. So
Right.
you could be working in the main room with the ones that did. You have a worksheet or whatever you're working on, and you could put 2 or 3 people in a room to watch the video. And then
Oh, okay.
once they've completed that, then that's a individual task that's not going to take particularly long. So they may only be out of the main room for 5 or 6 minutes, and then you bring them back in.
Okay, that might be a great idea for the ones that are, actually like joining in late, right? Perhaps, going.
The other thing I could think of it, we'd have to think about how it would work best for your students, but, most of us have multi-level classes. So we've got people that are going to be more independent learners and students that are going to need more of our attention. So it could be you could do something that way, that this level of student is a little more independent. I could send them to a breakout room to be working on a writing assignment while I'm doing some vocabulary work with the rest of the class or something like that.
Okay.
So do you guys have a whiteboard? I'm not seeing a whiteboard, but
We do. We actually used it today at our Zoom meeting, the whiteboard.
so how do you get to that, Marcella?
Okay, let me just give me a second to figure it out again. Okay, no. You see, right now I'm using my iPad. I was doing it in the computer in the morning, and it was so simple, but I'll figure it out. Hold on.
Oh, there I am. Okay.
Hey,
I
Diana.
see.
I turned, because I wasn't seeing this screen. I didn't know who was on. I was looking at the other screen. Okay, just wanted to make sure.
Okay, and share content, no.
Oh, is that where it is?
Whiteboard. Yes, share content, and then you have it at the very bottom, it says whiteboard.
Do you guys see the whiteboard?
There.
Yes.
Yes.
And can you all draw on it?
Yes. I was typing in the morning. Like we were working on sentences and I was typing. They would tell me the sentence and I would type for them to see.
Is that through
So
the annotate? The annotate?
Yes.
Okay. Yes, I did try that, but I had a difficult time getting out of it. I just working on assignments, so I stopped using it.
I think it just takes a little practice,
Right.
because I think that's one of the things that I've been having a little bit of just getting used to Zoom, is that you share your screen all the time, which is different than some of the other platforms. And so
Yes.
it's like, what? I have to share. So thank you, Marcella. That's exactly where it was.
Yes, that's great.
You're welcome.
But this breakout room might actually work. I have a visually impaired student, and I was just trying to figure how I would give him a different assignment. Okay, I see our break room is going to close in 54 seconds. Okay.
All right, I'll stop sharing. So we're just
Okay.
If you're still here, I thank you for helping us with our breakout room experiment. Our breakout rooms, you can just kind of toss it into the participant list. Our breakout room is something that you might want to experiment with once you get a little bit more comfortable with Zoom or whatever tool that you're using as your synchronous tool. All right, so last thing, I'm going to have you guys do sort of an exit poll. And we'll see if polls work. Yesterday they didn't work so well for us, and so I didn't want to make it something critical. So let's see. So this is a different way of doing an exit ticket. You should see a poll, and you should be able to answer the question. No poll. All right, so it's supposed to be a box that pops up in front of you, and for some reason it has not been working quite right, and we don't know why. Okay, well, that's why we put it at the end. It's just in case it didn't work. All right, Beth, I think that we're done. If you have anything you want to say to wrap this up, thank you all for participating in the breakout piece. We had a couple of questions. The breakouts are not normally activated. When you go into your account, you will need to enable breakout rooms. Once you do that, you get a little icon on the bottom of your screen that says breakout rooms, and if you click on that, you can play with it. Breakout room playing with, however, does not work very well if the room is empty. So you might want to, again, like we did at the end or near the end of a class, say, I want to try breakout rooms with everybody, and just do it like we did. Let everybody check out how it works, and then try it with an actual activity the next day.
Well, this is Beth Ponder. I'll leave the room open for a few more minutes, but again, thank you for participating this afternoon. We really appreciate that, and thank you, Duran, for being here and for this great presentation. And if you want to learn more from her on videos, go ahead and register in the PD portal for our session tomorrow. All right, thank you, everyone.